like we do.
All through that last year, Elijah Muhammad was chafing at the inability of his people, the Fruit of Islam, the sort of paramilitary wing of the Nation of Islam, their inability to kill Malcolm.
Today I'm speaking for myself. Formerly I spoke for Elijah Muhammad. And everything I said was, Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so. I'm speaking now from what I think, from what I have seen, from what I have analyzed, and the conclusions that I have reached.
The last meeting I had with him, he said, you know, I'm no longer a black nationalist. So I said, well, what do you call yourself? He says, I'm an internationalist.
Malcolm, just to prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please. I think you're right in my chair. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society.
Later on in those last months, when he made his other trips to Africa, and that he'd begun to realize that in terms of how we in this country describe black nationalism was not did not fly very well.
It's not a case of being good and bad, good or bad blacks and whites. It's a case of being good or bad human beings.
He's exposed to political leadership, radical political leadership all over the world. He does have to raise these questions. Well, if they're white and at least what we would call white and leading North African revolutionaries and they're Muslims, we can't just say that they're all blue-eyed devils.
Do you feel that your message, apparent message of love that you brought back from Islam is the real reason they're after you, because you're not hating as hard as they want you to?
Well, I never did hate anybody hard. But I do know that when I wrote that letter saying that there were white people in Mecca, it shook up a lot of Muslims, because most of the Muslims who follow Mr. Muhammad absolutely believed that it was impossible, physically impossible, I should say divinely impossible, for a white person to go to Mecca.
In 1964, Malcolm was projected as the devil figure in terms of, you know, the liberation movement.
You have to put it into the context of the times. This is the height of the so-called Cold propaganda, tremendous propaganda war between the Soviet Union and the United States. In 1964, when they had the UN debates on the Congo, 2 African diplomats, for the first time in history, when they were making their speeches, they say if the United States has the right to intervene in the Congo, who's to say that we don't have the right to intervene to help to protect black people from what is happening in Mississippi? That was unheard of.
Malcolm, do you intend to lead the charge in the United Nations?
Well, I find that to say you're going to lead something creates a lot of hostility, division, jealousy, and envy. I hope to work with any group of leaders or any group of organizations to do whatever is necessary to see that this problem is brought before the United Nations.
At about 3:15 p.m. This afternoon, there were about 400 persons present in the ballroom here, representing an organization known as the Afro-American Unity Organization, headed up by Malcolm X. He sustained one shot in the lower right chin, and the other 6 hit him in the chest and body.
I saw people crawling on the floor. And so I got down too. Then when I was looking out and I saw someone look in amazement to the front, I knew they had shot my husband.
He raised his hand in a Muslim greeting, Salam Alaikum. At that point, I heard a rumbling behind me, and I turned around in my seat to see what it was. Then I saw 2 guys standing up And the next thing, Malcolm had his hand up. He said, stay cool, stay calm. Just then the gunfire went off and his hand was up. I remember this. I turned around quickly, and the next thing I saw was Malcolm falling back in a dead faint.
What did Malcolm X mean to you?
He meant a great deal to me and my people. I'm sorry that a good man is gone. At the first I hear of it, I couldn't have cried any more, I don't believe, if I had lost my mother.
What did he mean to you? Can you tell me a bit more about it?
He meant deliverance for my people. And I hope we all walk in the same footsteps as Malcolm X was walking in.
He was a hero to me. He stood out among all black people. He showed the white man where it was at.
Why was he a hero?
He got respect. Why was he offered in Princeton and all these big white universities? Because they respected him too, the way I respect him.
In the last year, like Roy Wilkins said, he changed. He wanted to get along with the white people. But you people didn't want to get along with us.
Who do you believe is responsible for Malcolm X?
The white power structure in America is behind it. They're quick to capitalize on by saying that one of his own kind did it, but they put it up to be done.
What do you mean, the white power structure?
The white power structure of America. They know they had more to gain by getting Malcolm X out the way than they had to by letting him live. That's why I say.
But what is the white power structure?
Never mind, I just said the white power structure. You know the white race, don't you?
3 members of the Nation of Islam got locked up for Malcolm X's assassination, but there was always some questionable doubt of other agencies or government agencies.
Since the death of Malcolm X, have you encountered any serious trouble, or do you expect any serious trouble?
I have not encountered any serious trouble, and I don't expect to encounter with any serious trouble on Malcolm's death. This death of Malcolm himself had something to do with that.
There's COINTELPRO documents in which the FBI takes credit for feeding the feud between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam. So I definitely think the United States government takes responsibility. And unfortunately, I think the Nation of Islam takes responsibility because the killers came from within, and the atmosphere created by leadership in the nation allowed that assassination to go forward.
So brothers and sisters, we are known for having the most peaceful meetings of any large group of people in America, and we intend to continue to have it. So now that everything is back to order, we shall proceed. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir. Let's have a round of applause for the messenger of Allah.
When Malcolm was assassinated, he was trying to deal with capitalism as one big issue. How does capitalism affect black folks? How does that economic system compare to other economic systems? And even if we lived under a capitalistic system, remember at one point he said all capitalists were bloodsuckers. And at another point he said also that his friends were socialists, communists, capitalists, you know, that kind of thing. So I think he was still wrestling with knowing the kind of economic system that we live under and that everybody mostly lives under across the world.
Malcolm was a real threat. And you know, regardless of what the particular details might be around his assassination, it was so clear that the power structures did not want to see Malcolm and all of those who identified with him continue in that path toward internationalism, linking our struggles in the U.S. with struggles in Africa, with struggles in the Middle East, with struggles in Asia and Latin America. That was the real threat. And I think that had Malcolm not been assassinated, that he would have urged many more people to develop that kind of international perspective.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's below me.
if anything, that's what we've seen. The 9-inch knife has been, slightly removed a little bit over the last few decades, and or maybe I would argue adjusted in its place within our back. And what we have to do is not accept what we're being encouraged to accept as progress. We have to develop our own standard for what that would look like. And then if it doesn't reach that, we don't accept it as progress.
There's a worldwide revolution going on. It goes beyond Mississippi. It goes beyond Alabama. It goes beyond Harlem. What is it revolting against? The power structure. The American power structure? No. The French power structure? No. The English power structure? No. Then what power structure? An international Western power structure.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
En un mundo en constante movimiento, todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos y es necesario conocerlos. Nos preguntamos, ¿qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan? Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturday, only on TeleSUR. We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome to Interviews from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlson, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on TeleSUR. Immigration turned out to be one of the top issues that the Republican Party used to mobilize their base in the past midterm elections in the United States, with more or less mixed results. With the Central American caravan, or exodus, coming up through Mexico toward the U.S. border, there's been a lot of focus on the issue and people going into or trying to go into the United States. But what about those who are coming back? The people, especially young people, who are either deported or forcibly returned to their home countries after living almost an entire lifetime in the United States. On today's program, we're very fortunate to have with us Jill Anderson. Jill, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Jill is the co-director here in Mexico City of Otros Dreams en Acción, Other Dreams in Action, a group of young people who have been deported or returned from the United States and who have organized for their rights and for the difficult process of assimilating back into a society that some of them don't even really know. Jill, could you describe a little bit what your organization does here?
Sure. Yeah, we actually just recently in enero, I'm thinking in Spanglish, in January, we inaugurated a new cultural space here in Mexico City called Pocho House, or Pocha House. And pocho is a term that's used for traditionally, and it's a derogatory negative term for Mexicans who went to the States and have come back and are maybe being pretentious, or, you know, this is sort of the way it translates directly into rotten fruit, you know, are no longer Mexican or totally Mexican, right?
I never knew the origins of that word.
Yeah, so it's very painful for a lot of people who've experienced hearing that word at their family dinner table, and it's been painful for this generation of young people who are basically in exile from their home in the United States because they grew up there. Many of them speak English better than Spanish. English was their first kiss, right? So what we're doing is really organizing, but also creating a safe space, and that they're sort of laying out what this new culture and these new demands are, because it's so new. This is a whole new, you know, they say they're not dreamers, but they're the sons and daughters of NAFTA. You know, they've been, their identities in a sense have been created by these migration policies. And so ODA is really accompanying this population in their process that's ongoing here in Mexico, and their demands to go back to the US, but also to be here in Mexico. De aquí, de allá, the right not to migrate and the right to go there, the right for mobility.
Well, yeah, it must be particularly painful, this term pocho, a derogatory term in Spanish for people who have lost their Mexican culture because they just got kicked out of the U.S. culture. So it's like, who loves me?
Right,
know?
And that sense of being ni de aquí ni de allá, I'm not from here or from there, is now completely written in policy and enforcement procedures, right? You really aren't from here or from there, and their experience in Mexico reinforces that.
They get the same kind of rejection here in Mexico?
Many, you know, it's a very diverse population, and this is something that, you know, I've been working with these issues and with this community for over 6 years now. So this was happening under Obama also, you know, even before Trump. You know, people either being deported or making the very difficult decision to return because a family member was deported, or because many who lived in states like Georgia and Alabama and Florida, where it was very hard to continue their education after high school or find a job, thought, why not go to Mexico? You know, there I'm a citizen, there I have papers, I'll be able to go to school, I'll be able to find a job, you know, and really based on what they'd heard from their parents or from family members, many times against the wishes of their parents, who were like, no, Mexico's not like here, it'll be hard. And then they got here, and it was actually, many of them found themselves to be undocumented in Mexico.
How's that?
in the sense that for example, when you arrive, the documents that you may have from the United States, like the matrícula consular, is not valid.
Which would be the consulate document of identity.
Exactly, that many Mexicans have been able to get from their consulate nearby, and then they get here and it's not recognized in the banks, it's not valid.
Why, if it's from a Mexican consulate?
Right? It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. For them too. They're like, and it's shocking. And then to get, you know, to get a birth certificate, for those who are deported, they have no documents when they arrive, and then it can be quite many bureaucratic hurdles to get those documents. For example, the INE, which is the electoral card, which is the most common form of ID for, you know, renting a place, for opening a bank account, for getting money sent to you from your relatives in the U.S. To get that, many times, if it's expired or if it was, sometimes you can get an INE from the consulate now too. There's a new program. But if you go to renew or change your address, sometimes they'll ask for 2 or 3 witnesses here in Mexico. But if you've just been returned or deported, you don't have that kind of network even to bring witnesses. So to get that document has been extremely challenging. During the electoral season, they stopped giving out the documents for about 4 months. And all those people who were deported during that time had no way to have that, you know, identity document. So that's what we mean when we say people come back and they find themselves undocumented in their country of birth.
Well, people, I mean, these kinds of things are basically technological or rather bureaucratic fixes that should be relatively easy. What's going on there? Is there a lack of political will? Are they just completely inept in fixing these problems for what's obviously a growing population? About how many people are here? And
there's about 3.6 million people who have returned or been deported. Those are estimates from...
In what time period?
Around 2006 to 2015.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
And those are conservative estimates, because no one's counting when people cross the border. No one's counting, you know, we have really the census data from 2010, and then hopefully census data from 2020 will give us much more accurate numbers, because there's 1 or 2 questions that help us understand across the country people who have been out of the country for a long time and are now back. But there's no one other than we have the data of those who have been repatriated or removed, and we have some surveys from COLEF and other places that give us a sense of the numbers who are returning, but no one is counting this population. So I would say 3.6 million is actually conservative, and it's a lot, and and that's based on, you know, those who the Obama administration deported, those who came back during the economic crisis in 2007-2008, and those who continue to be returned or to return under the Trump policies.
To give us a sense of the kind of problems and the kind of personal stories that are involved here, tell us about someone you know and what they went through, from a deportation in the United States to landing basically in Mexico.
I really have to think about whose story I'd like to share, because at this point I know so many, and the stories are so diverse. It's hard to really focus on one. Recently, you know, actually at Pocha House now, 1 to 3 people who have experienced deportation stop by each week, just by word of mouth or by internet. They find us. So one young man, he was he had a stay of removal for many years. So he had a deportation order that under Obama was a stay of removal, and he would go sign, you know, we've read about these stories in the news. He would go sign each month, or I think it was every 3 months, to say that he was still there and that he was in this process.
Where was he? What state?
He was in North Carolina. And what the Trump administration has done has basically pulled sort of a protection off of those people. and made them basically they're available for deportation in ways that they were in a legal process, so it wasn't a total protected status, it was pretty much a memorandum, it was an enforcement
But still,
policy.
they're playing by the rules.
They're playing
going
by the
into
rules.
signing, and they're grabbed.
They're signing, and they are grabbed when they go to the courthouse to sign.
In the courthouse.
And so he goes to sign. One of his best friends is outside, and he says, "Can I tell her what's happening?" When the immigration agent, so he's signing with Homeland Security, UCSIS, and it's ICE that's. And we're not even sure always that they're in communication, but ICE comes and picks him up right there. He says, "Can I talk to my best friend? Can I tell her what's happening?" They're like, "No." He was like, "Well, can you give her my phone and all?" So he gives his phone and all of his wallet and everything to her because he was worried about it not getting it back. She takes it, and then he gets detained and sent immediately to a detention center. I forget which one now. And she actually calls a friend who is volunteering at Pocha House. And he basically immediately, we sort of went into action with what we know about how to track someone, about how to help them. We were able to, let him know what kind of documents he would need.
So you do work over the border too?
Oh yeah, we have a network across Mexico and the United States. We actually have a network of 160 young people who are undocumented or formerly undocumented, who are in touch with each other and working together on these issues on both sides, and really trying to reimagine what does it mean to do binational solidarity work, in this new moment.
Essential.
Absolutely essential and so hard, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so then we were able to follow him. A friend that he made in the detention center ended up helping him go to Tepic because they were dropped off in Reynosa, I think, and they were so nervous and rightfully so, and they were just like, we got to get out of here. They didn't even go by the Somos Mexicanos Repatriation Center because they just felt like we just got to get a bus out of here. So they had some money from relatives sent to them through another friend because he didn't have any identity documents, went to Tepic, and then we were able to help him get on a bus to Mexico City. And then his friend flew down. This also is often, U.S. family members and friends often become part of the support network in addition to Mexican family, if there is still a Mexican network. But if you've been in the U.S. for 10 or 20 years, many times your network in Mexico is very fragile. It's people that maybe you talk to on Skype or maybe you text, but it's not sort of your solidarity network. So she came down and we were able to support him to get his, it takes about 2 weeks to get a birth certificate, a CURP, and an INE. And we were able to help him find some housing for those 2 weeks with,
How old is he?
Partners. He is in his 20s, early 20s.
And he had been in the United States
since he was 14, 13. Yeah, so that's just one example of so many, hundreds, in our network. And of course, thousands in the context of what's happening on a daily level, to families and young people because of these deportation policies.
Are you seeing any kinds of improvements as your group and other organizations have worked to raise the issues, especially with government authorities in these various offices?
Yeah, so we actually were, before our group was created, it's been a long process, and it was in part born out of a book that I did called Los Otros Dreamers. And through that book, we participated with a lot of other organizations and individuals working with the CEP, the Secretaría de Educación Pública, the Department of Education here in Mexico, to change the revalidation requirements.
Yeah.
So, because I mentioned, first you're undocumented and you have to find out where to live. Then you have to find out your livelihood, where to work. And then many people have been interested in continuing their education, particularly in this sort of generation. They're bilingual or becoming even more bilingual after returning. They finished high school or got their GED in the United States. Many times they're the first family member to have graduated from high school. And they're interested in continuing their higher education, or they had partial high school and they want to continue high school, especially young kids who have arrived at 17, 16 years old, and it's been very challenging for them to insert themselves into the Mexican high school system. So we were really involved for several years in processing the Senate with the Department of Education to change those, and actually in February or April really of 2017 of last year, in part we call it the Trump effect, but in part because sort of many people sort of woke up to the fact that this was happening, even though it had been happening for years, when Trump made it, such a Twitter headline issue.
One beneficial
Right. I mean, in all irony, it's the Trump effect. And so many of the changes that we'd been advocating for several years were actually taken up and written into law and to the new regulations for revalidating your studies from outside. And this actually supports refugees and in addition to Mexican citizens, because it's anyone who has an education outside of the U.S. And now, at least on paper, it's easier, faster, there's more, more flexible to be able to revalidate your studies. And for the first time ever, the GED is recognized in Mexico. Before it wasn't even recognized as an equivalent to a high school degree.
GED, which is the general equivalency exam, which you can get as a high school degree without actually finishing the coursework.
You take about 3 months courses and you can finish.
Yeah, and take the exam. Well, that's very important as a gain. Of course, as in everything, it remains to be seen how well it works in practice. But speaking of refugees, your group worked with the refugees, the Central American exodus or caravan coming through Mexico City. What was the work that they carried out there, and why the contact between the deported from the United States and those who are still following, and some of them even still say it this way, the American dream?
Right. That was really, in many ways, the reason why we felt like we needed to be there, because one, the Trump policies and the Trump reaction to the caravan and the exodus affects Mexican families and Mexican mixed status. Mixed status means there's, some who might have U.S. citizenship, some who might have DACA, some who might have a green card, and some who are deported, who are now on the other side of the border. And it directly affects them. So we feel like their cause is our cause. We also
it directly affects them how?
In the sense that the criminalization of any unlawful presence and crossing along the border, that affects all Central Americans, and no matter your nationality, the higher level of danger that people are facing certainly affects them.
And it whipped up a lot of racism.
Continually whipping up a lot of racism, exactly, and in general, twisting the reality of migration to such an extent that it becomes about, really about us versus them, about, and about this racist other that's invading our country. And when many of the people in our network are from the United States and from Mexico, and they grew up, they're like, best friends with maybe a white or an Asian American kid, or even a Mexican American kid who has citizenship. And there's nothing different. There's nothing that divides them except for now these racist policies and this very twisted understanding of our region and our countries. So I think, that definitely
and as you say, of what
them.
Immigration is and what it means.
Right, and one of the things, and we have these conversations all the time in our network and at Pocha House, because even amongst, everyone's working out their relationship to these discourses about being illegal or being not illegal, and a person can never be illegal, but then again, I've come back to Mexico to finally be in my country of birth, but it turns out that I don't have all of those rights and facilities I thought I would. So there's this deep questioning about what does it mean to be a citizen, but an identity, but also what does it mean to be a citizen really, and what does it mean to be from a nation and to be patriotic, and really is that allowing me to do the things that I need to do and want to do with my family and my life and my future and my community. And so we're in those debates all the time, and in ways that are much more interesting than you read about in the Trump version of this reality that's so distorted.
So what would Other Dreams in Action member say to a Honduran refugee who's trying to get into the United States? What are they saying to this caravan?
Well, what we said and what I overheard many of them sharing was, first of all, there is the struggle against this system that makes us have to leave, that forced our parents, in the case of those who are dreamers or identify as dreamers, to leave, and that now deports and detains us. This, that struggle is here in Mexico too, and that struggle is in Central America, and that struggle is in the U.S. It's not just in the U.S. And that's something that we're saying all the time everywhere, but that's something that they've said very clearly. Because the caravan and the Exodus it's going north, it wants to be in the United States. Like you said, many even have this idea of the American dream, even though, it's complicated, but it's certainly better than Honduras, and also there's a sense that Mexico is not any safer, which is understandable. There are parts of Mexico that are equally unsafe and violent to San Pedro Sula in Honduras, right? So we've sort of just had conversations about those realities, and that Mexico is actually a lot bigger of a country, that there are places where you can be a part of this struggle. It's not easy. There's racism in Mexico also, but really inviting them to sort of join this struggle in Mexico and in the U.S., always respecting their decision, because I think that part of the amazing sort of model, even though it's so complicated and difficult to understand, of the Exodus, is the fact that when you're fighting for your life, when you can't feed your kids, when climate change has made it hard to get a crop for 3 to 4 years now, migration is freedom, migration is life, and that's what they're saying. And that's partly what's being so distorted, because that is the reality. That's what we've heard over and over and over, just being here in Mexico City and listening to them. And we understand that, we get that. And many of the young people who've been deported and detained can hear that. But we're really clear that there's options in Mexico, maybe that weren't there, and hopeful that maybe with the new government and the new transition government in Mexico City, that some of these really nice laws, this respect for human rights, will extend to not only deportees and returnees, but also refugees and asylum seekers in new ways. And we want to be a part of that. And we talked about ways that they might be a part of that. But it's also, what can you offer, really? It's going to be hard here too. It's the worst of many difficult possibilities. It's really difficult.
Yeah, between a rock and a hard place, to say the least.
Exactly.
But the phrase "migration is life" is very powerful, and you do see that so much. I've got to keep moving forward, because this is how I survive.
Exactly.
And this is how this is the only way I can create new horizons. Do you talk to them specifically about the kinds of things they can expect now in the United States?
Yeah, so we went there with the idea of sharing the realities in Mexico City. So sort of saying, this is what it says on the poster, this is the reality. These are the rights, this is what the day-to-day. And then that also true of Mexico, and also true of the northern border and the United States. And even once you got into the United States, if you get in, these are the realities. So we talked about including, the lines in Tijuana, the fact that, it's very difficult to apply for asylum. 2 of the members of our community went and shared their experience of being rejected for asylum and being deported days later, and the trauma of that experience for them and their families. And the idea is that they go more informed, not to persuade anyone, and also, and then we also always referred people to lawyers. Obviously, we weren't lawyers. We weren't doing any sort of asylum,
counseling in the legal sense.
In a legal sense. But sharing the realities, which is so important, because the asylum system actually rejects many people who are fleeing for their lives because the qualifications internationally, really, not just the U.S. In Europe
we're talking
also.
About a global phenomenon.
Right.
And the Mexican asylum system.
The Mexican asylum system also, where
it just keeps you on hold for basically a very long time.
Right.
Yeah. So what were some of the responses? Did you find that there was an empathy between the people who have left their countries and are seeking to go to the United States in how your group was received and listened to?
Not only an empathy, but many of the people had been in the United States and deported from the United States before, so they'd already been deported back to Honduras or Guatemala, and then facing those increased challenges in the same sort of scenario here in Mexico, but in that, even more difficult context, had made the decision to join the caravan. And so they're, oh, how many months were you in detention? Oh, I was there 6 months, I was there 4 months, which center? Those were the conversations. And one of the things that's clear, we talk about this a lot with counterparts in the US who think a lot about Latinos and Latinas, right? And we've been talking about how in this new reality, the Latinos, there's like the second diaspora of Latinos and Latinas. And so a young person who grew up in their high school or went to college in, California, is deported or returns to Mexico and identifies as much as a Latino or Latina as she may as Mexican, right?
Yeah.
Which is, that's really a US produced sort of identity because of the immigration dynamic for the last 30 years. And now they're here, and now with the Exodus Caravan, you're seeing that sort of, that Latin sort of kind of empathy, but shared experience that's constructed by a US racist sort of mechanism of deporting people, expelling them, but also drawing them for labor. And, and around the last 30 years, it's relatively new. It's my lifetime that this phenomenon has sort of been created.
And it's changing all the time.
Right.
I'm really struck by this question of labels, because you have people, are you a deported person? Are you returned? We have the system itself to kind of process people has this necessity or this obsession with putting labels on people, and yet you see, because of the flows, because of the complexity, even in nationality, which is something we consider part just kind of bedrock of our identity, is so much in flux that you have this complete confusion of labels that both on the personal and political level gets to be very complicated, but also kind of opens up new opportunities.
Exactly.
And on that note, unfortunately, we have to end the show because very quickly we've come to the end of our time. But I want to thank you so much for being here with us, Jill.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. In a world that doesn't stop, We give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR. We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean.
Hello, how are you? Welcome to the Healthy News of TeleSUR. It's a pleasure to accompany you. I'm Jenny Flores. In today's program, we'll be talking with the Venezuelan specialist Rafael Enriquez about the different types of wounds and how to act with each of them. We'll get you the details later. Meanwhile, we'll review the relevant information of the last few days in terms of health.
Carissa Etienne, Director of the Pan-American Health Organization, calls on countries to integrate their COVID-19 vaccination efforts into their routine immunization system. During the launch of coronavirus vaccines, countries establish emergency systems so that they can take advantage of these infrastructures and merge them with routine immunization systems to make them more comfortable and accessible to all families, and thus catch up with other inoculation schedules. A process that will help not to lower our card seems despite to low numbers of cases and deaths registered in recent weeks against the coronavirus. The new coronavirus, according to the WHO Emergency Committee, COVID-19 remains a public health emergency of international relevance despite decision of some countries to lift to a state of health contingency. The strategic advisory group of effort immunization explained that the evidence that has emerged in recent years reveals that seems those scheduled against human papillomavirus HPV provide protection against cervical cancer comparable to the that of 2 or 3 dose remains. The finding will allow more girls and women to receive immunization and be protected from cervical cancer and its consequences on their lives. Cervical cancer is a preventable disease in almost all cases. However, many women suffer from it succumb to unequal access to health services, including vaccines, causing more than 95% of cervical cancer, which is a fourth most common type of cancer among women in the world. 90% of women who suffer from it live in low and middle income countries. In addition to the cost of vaccine is relatively high in 2020, global coverage reaches just 30% of it is said that all countries include HPV vaccines. This requires a political commitment, the equality of access to immunization. WHO Assistant Director General Nam Tembra Simalela expressed confidence of that cervical cancer can be eliminated because vaccine clarified that absence of vaccine has not slowed and the coverage in countries much lower than the projected 90% target due to various factors. The initiative of the UNO agency that ensures global public health aims to prevent provisions viruses transmitted by insect awareness from leading the world to another pandemic in the future. That is why the world Health organizations have launched a plan to prevent this happening to engage yellow fever, chikungunya, and second explain of viruses that pose a massive health to train tropical and subtropical parts of the planet, although in fact there are growing numbers of viruses of prey worldwide according to the WHO. The focus of global virus initiative will be to focus resources on risk monitoring, pandemic prevention, preparedness, detection, and response. Emphasizing that international action is critical given the frequency and magnitude of various outbreaks, particularly those made by Aedes mosquitoes who escape and linked to climate change, the growth of the population and proliferation of urbanized spaces. The address of the key to the new plan is to develop capacity to deal with arboviral pathogens in frontline health facilities as well as regionally and globally.
Time of the important health days of the week. Let's see.
Important health days. May 1st, International Nursing Day. In order to contribute to all members of health teams performing recovery, rehabilitation, disease prevention, and health promotion functions around the world. May 10, World Lupus Day. A disease in which the immune system attacks a body's own healthy tissues by mistaking them for foreign tissues. According to the scientists' studies, there is no cure for the disease, but treatments help control symptoms. May 12, World Fibromyalgia Day, whose main feature is a generalized pain of the musculoskeletal system and which also generates a persistent fatigue, although it is a seasonal unknown and there are suspicions that it originates neurological. It has not yet been possible to determine demonstrable causes. May 20, World Day of the Fight Against Depression. An alteration of mood of the presence with a set of diseases such as pathological substance, apathy, and irritability. Every May 4th, the first application of the smallpox vaccine is commemorated. Used during the early 70s of the last century in autism was completely eradicated.
We are back with Got Your Body. On this occasion, we prepared a special interview with the Venezuelan surgeon Rafael Enriquez. We talked about how our body, especially the cells, acts in a wound. Visibly, we can experience bleeding and feel pain, but at the microscopic level, a whole series of mechanisms happen to self-heal. How to contribute to that process of regeneration? We'll know this next.
The skin is our largest organ, with about 9 kilos and has a approximately surface of 2 square meters. It's made up of a superficial layer that is defined as epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous cellular tissue, and accessory structures such as hair, nails, or hair. This can suffer all alterations as in the cases of wounds, which produces natural process pain, bleeding, and separation of their edge in the case of cuts.
Wounds are defined as the relationship of the anatomical loss of the skin and its structures produced by a physical or chemical external agent.
There are several classifications for wounds in which we can find what we classified according to their bacteriological state, according to the state of the skin, according to its causes.
The most used classification is according to its causes, in which we can find puncture wounds that can be produced, for example, by knives, abrasive wounds in which there's a tear of the skin, wounds by burns, bites. We can also find avulsive wounds in which there's a separation of the tissue, and we can also find wounds produced by firearm and by knives.
The first thing we must do facing a wound is to identify what type it is. Since depending on its type, it has a different treatment and therefore we have to remain calm and identify if it merits specialized medical assistance.
Facing this type of wound that presents an important bleeding, because we must cover it with a dressing or gauze that are sterile, or a cloth that is as clean as possible. If we are in the presence of a wound that can be handled at home, the first thing we must do is wash our hands. Wear gloves if they're available. Clean the wound with some antiseptic solution that is verified and approved. After this, we can cover the wound. Cover with a cloth that is clean, okay? I know that sometimes we do not have the scope to have sterile gauze or medical surgical products, but as long as we make a good coverage of the wound to avoid infections and complications of them is enough.
In the presence of a wound that presents a significant bleeding, we must always cover it by imprisonment. It is not recommended to make tourniquets because this can aggravate the vascular lesion where the wound is present. There are also guidelines on what not to do in case of accidental gas or burn at home. There are many myths about how to have help or break kitchen ingredients to use in the presence of wound, but many times ingredients that are not sterilised can contain germs and microbes that could cause infection and be worse in remedy than disease.
What should we not do in the presence of a wound? Do not use coffee grounds to try to stop the bleeding. That is one of the many mistakes that are made at home as usual. Do not use toothpaste. We must always identify what is the type of wound to be able to give prior assistance to the medical assistance they need. We should not use coffee, we should not use gasoline, we should not use cotton, because it can also leave particles that can later infect the wound and thus delay the healing process of the wound.
Fortunately, the skin as a living organ has a high regenerative capacity. It is solved every day and attempts to the process healing is given. Simple and complete wounds tend to evolve to spontaneous healing, while when complications as infection occur, they will be delayed healing. Regeneration of wounds occur in 3 phases.
We have a first phase, an inflammatory phase, in which there's a migration of cells from the circulation to the wound for its subsequent repair. There's a proliferative phase, in which there's a formation of new blood vessels, in which there's collagen production, and there's a remodeling to give rise to the scar tissue that will already be as a final result of healing. And there will be a final phase in which we will already have the approximate edges of the wound with its final scar tissue.
A wound takes approximately 7 to 50 days to heal, and by 21 days we should have fully stopped its healing. As for serious injuries that have required medical assistance, care from the home is necessary.
What we must do before a wound that is already treated at a medical level is first to maintain the good hygiene of the same. Making cures can be a daily or interdaily as recommended by the medical staff with antiseptic soap that is verified, and always maintain the coverage of the same to avoid complications and infections and thus delay the healing process.
Also, with the lifestyle, we can collaborate with the healing process through the food and simple practices.
To help speed up the regeneration of a wound, we must maintain hydration. We must maintain a good diet. Do not wash the wound excessively, because that can also contribute to complicating the wound and not healing in due time. We must not expose them to high temperatures, and do not expose them to agents that are contaminants.
Food influences the healing process and all the processes of our body. It is recommended that it be balanced, rich in proteins and carbohydrates, and all include foods that are rich in vitamin A, in vitamin D, and in zinc, which are the ones that have the greatest capacity for the regeneration of the skin.
There are no specific foods that are counterproductive for the wound healing process, but it is recommended to avoid the use of industrialized sugar and fats because this can delay the effectiveness of the healing process.
One of the aspects that worry people are scars that usually remain after quits of burns, that mark up often for life, and can cause self-esteem problems since the image of a person is affected. Hence, the cosmetic industry has been responsible for creating products that promise to eliminate scars.
That will depend on the type of wound that occurs because it's not the same a gunshot wound or a puncture wound or a burn. These can range from an atrophic wound to a keloid.
The size or magnitude of the scar will depend on modifiable and non-modifiable factors.
Among the non-modifiable factors we have, for example, the age. It's not the same the healing of an older adult to that of a young patient, okay? We can also find that race, because patients with a dark complexion tend to make more hypertrophic and keloid scars, and patients with a diagnosis of dermatological diseases. Among the modifiable factors, we can find hydration, nutrition, and base diseases such as diabetes and hyperthyroidism.
At the medical level, various medications are used to help. Their use will depend on the type of wound we present, because we cannot use the same components for a burn wound as for a puncture wound.
So among the drugs or components that we can use roughly, we can find iodine, povidone, chlorhexidine, and alcohol. And ozonated oil is currently being used to aid wound healing. Sulfadiazine is used, for example, when a wound needs to heal, when it needs stitches, that one uses it because it makes the raffia or the stitches can be used, and it's used mostly in burns, the sulfadiazine.
The use of painkillers and antibiotics is also usually recommended to with pain, which is normal to happen in infections since an area exposed to the environment.
When one, for example, receives a patient with a wound, he is sent a chemoprophylaxis, which is the use of an antibiotic agent to prevent the wound from becoming complicated because the body already suffered an injury. Then the patient, there was manipulation of the tissue. The one indicates to the patient that chemoprophylaxis, his antibiotic, his gastric protector to prevent the antibiotic to affect the stomach, and we prescribe painkillers.
To conclude, we know that upon there may be incidents that may produce some type of wounds. Therefore, it is important to have information about that we should do in the presence of this and up from the tranquility facing up bleeding.
We thank the specialist Rafael Enriquez for all the information he gave us. Well, now we know how to apply the emergency measures when we have any type of wound. Logically, we also have to know the skin, an organ that breathes, absorbs, and eliminates toxins. One way to know the state of our internal health is to see how our skin is. Is it dry or not? Flexible or dry? Features that we can use as a reference. And following this line, we will see some fun facts.
Fun facts and skin on wounds. According to the Spanish Society of Wounds, the wound should remain covered and, if possible, with a healing dressing and a humid environment, since they are the ones that best stimulate the psychological condition of healthy skin. The skin heals differently in different parts of the body. In the face of any aggression, our skin sets in motion the necessary mechanism to repair itself, but the intensity, the speed, and type of repair is very variable if the wound has occurred in the face of overlap. Areas such as the neckline, shoulders and ears, and areas of high ribs for the bottom highlights of hypertrophic scars, that is, scars larger than usual. The face or other highly vascular areas tend to have quickly tubutype, and what happens, for example, in the legs. When someone touches your skin, also touches your brain. Know what touches us at each moment and how to react to have the body see. In turn, our skin is never the same. It's constantly renewed. The average period of a skin sheet is usually 21 days.
Back in the healthy news of TeleSUR, our positive note takes us to Mexico. We are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Continue the advance in the fight against COVID-19. Statistics indicate that it's reducing its level of contagion, which has made it possible to reduce sanitary measures. We'll learn more about the work done with our correspondent Eduardo Martinez from Mexico City.
The COVID-19 vaccination posts have been placed in strategic and highly influxed sites. In Mexico City, people can request to be given a dose at the subway station or in the markets.
It is okay because people who don't want vaccines is their problem, because it is already more accessible, because right now I didn't waste time, I didn't spend on tickets.
300 sites have been enabled by the government of the Mexican capital, which announced the end of sanitary measures such as the use of sanitizing mats or the taking of temperature to enter some closed sites.
In the law levels that COVID is, it is considered that the taking of temperature is not necessary, that the use of a mask and how at the entrances of the establishments, that is what until now determined the measure of health.
The country celebrates 90 days with a downward trend in the statistics on the epidemic caused by the coronavirus. Before them, states such as Nuevo León have determined that masks only in public transport and schools will be requested. Meanwhile, federal authorities announced that the vaccination is the determining factor in keeping the health emergency under control. In the country, 996 million doses have been administered to 85 million people over the age of 12. Meanwhile, the government is looking for pediatric vaccines in the face of the refusal of the COVAX mechanism to deliver versions for minors. Eduardo Martinez, TeleSUR, Mexico City.
This way, we end this episode of Call Your Body. I invite you to stay informed with us in our social networks: Instagram at Guía Tu Cuerpo TeleSUR, Twitter at Guía Tu Cuerpo TLS, my account at JFloresTeleSUR. We also put at your disposal our email guiatucuerpo@telesurtv.net, and I invite you to review our previous broadcasts on our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us and allowing us to influence in your quality of life. From this side of the screen, Jenny Flores says goodbye. Until next time.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer, so stop